Boston was a huge success. Of course, there is one jewel out there that still evades MMA. That is the state of New York, and specifically eventually having a fight in Madison Square Garden. David Paterson, the governor of New York, had included it in a budget bill to put MMA into effect in that state, but that was shot down before it could go any further out of committee. Bob Reilly has been an opponent of mixed martial arts. Recently, our producer, Bo Vonsekun, sat down with him in the state capital, Albany, and here is what Mr. Reilly had to say about MMA.
The greatest problem I find with mixed martial arts or ultimate fighting is that it's violent. And I believe that violence begets violence. Now, in New York State, the legislature and the governor constantly are trying to do away with violence. Violence in schools, violence in our urban cities, domestic violence. And I think this just helps perpetuate and encourage violence. All of the mixed martial arts, there's a great history to them because the mixed martial arts developed over literally centuries in some cases, based on a philosophy of making your body and your mind stronger, and in many cases as a defense. Now, when you take two sports, let us take wrestling and boxing. There is a reason why in boxing, when a man or a woman is on his or her knees, that the opponent in boxing cannot slam them in the head. There's a purpose for that. And the reason is safety. Well, when you combine the two, that's when you have the problem. So you're taking two different disciplines and combining them. It would be like taking a highway and saying, well, you can drive on either side of the road. All right? That's what causes the problem. And so then ask your question, why aren't the martial arts popular as far as a fan base? And the reason is no violence. What attracts people to ultimate fighting, unfortunately, is violence. And violence is not good for our society. Safeguards could come. Some people say, are there any way that you could accept mixed martial arts? And I say yes, if you drastically change your rules and took the violence out of it. But you take the violence out of it, as I think demonstrated before, and then its attractiveness to a large fan base is gone. I think that what we want to do is control the violence in every sport, all right? And I think in all sports they're doing that. So I think the best example is the National Football League, which is trying to get damage out. In the National Football League, the purpose is to put the football through the goal or to put it into the end zone. In mixed martial arts, the purpose is violence. And in fact, under the rules of Pride, one of the 5 criteria was damage to your opponent. The difference between mixed martial arts and every other sport is that in mixed martial arts, the purpose is to damage your opponent.
We'll point out that obviously he is opposed to it, but Mr. Reilly isn't the only one. That's why it hasn't been passed. We also, Inside MMA, talked with Mark Ratner, who is the UFC's Vice President of Regulatory Affairs. He gave this response, quote, "We respectfully disagree. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when," end of quote, regarding MMA eventually getting into New York State. So, again, Bob Reilly is a very vocal opponent. Next week we'll have part 2 talking about the financial implications, as they have found in Europe, they found in Australia, and all over the U.S. practically except for New York, that MMA and specifically the UFC can bring to a state and a community.
I think it's crazy. I did a lot of research on the guy, and I go, he puts, like, for instance, he says gambling, prostitution, live executions, and MMA. He puts them all in the same sentence. It's like almost propaganda. If you start repeating this to people the whole time, they're going to see it as something violent. I have no clue. The purpose of MMA is to hurt somebody. Ask Mike Tyson what was the purpose for him. In boxing, what he does. We always defend ourselves by something that's really easy to say. An 8 count. That is the most dangerous thing there is. Think about it. You know, you get hit, you go down, you're wobbly, your brain is telling your body, I don't want to do it anymore. No. People pay money here to watch. Let's give you 10 seconds. You're good to go. Can you see this finger case? Yeah, go. And they go again. Going to get knocked down again. This is constantly going. That is brain damage. In mixed martial arts, if you're on top of somebody, you mount, and we all saw this, if 3 clean punches come through before the guy gets knocked out, they're going to pull him off. They stop the fight. I don't get it. All the punches are directed to the head. in boxing, but boxing is okay. Even worse, so they say wrestling is okay. Somebody else said pro wrestling, that's okay. I said pro wrestling, it's okay. It's a bad example for kids, mixed martial arts. But pro wrestling is not a bad example. Kids think that is real. That's why you see guys jumping out of the window on top of somebody else. That kid dies or breaks his back. How many times did we hear that? Kids think it's real. I say cause and effect. That's what you see in mixed martial arts. You hurt somebody, well, he goes down. So let's not do that on the street. I think it's actually a good example.
Randy, what do you think about listening to Mr. Reilly?
Well, I just think it's an uneducated view. He doesn't understand our sport. And I don't think there's anything violent about our sport. It's a contact sport for sure, and it's not for everybody, but it's not about violence. It's not killing and maiming. He's obviously uneducated. He's going back 6 years to citing Pride rules when Pride hasn't existed for quite some time. And certainly the rules for Pride were a little more contact oriented when you could kick on the ground and a lot of those other things. But even that was relatively safe as combative sports go and sports in general. So I think that, we've got an education process in place here. We're trying to make these people see that we're not crazy, we're not dangerous, this is not violence, it's a combative sport.
You've got two good examples sitting to your right. I mean, two good-looking young guys sitting right there that are in this sport. I mean, really. Do you think, Ryan, if you could go before the New York Assembly and say, hey, look at me, this is something I've chosen, I'm a smart guy, I'm a young guy, and this is what I want to go into?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at, it seems to me the majority of MMA fighters are well educated and know what they're getting themselves into. And, the biggest thing about his argument for me is if he's okay with boxing, I don't understand how you're not okay with MMA.
I don't get it.
If you want to be against both,
he's kind of against everything that seems to involve violence except some of football,
Yeah.
And that's kind of...
This is the kind of guy, if you go to him and you ask him, why is the glove invented? He will say it's to protect the head. He doesn't do his homework.
What would you say to him?
You got two living examples here right now. You got Randy Couture, who's 47, and you got Bas Rutten, who fought for so long time. And look at them. They're healthy. They look good. And I don't see what he says that do damage to the body. Because if you put MMA fighters competing with boxers, the boxers then the ones that get the brain damage. Any of the MMA fighters then get brain damage, So I don't know where he bring the violence. So yeah, it's a contact sport, as Randy says before. Like, it's a contact sport. It's a hard sport, but we got discipline in the sport, and we don't go out and bash people in the street. So we don't go out and to the bars and cause dramas.
Yeah.
We discipline.
There's a moment also in another interview that he compares amateur boxing to mixed martial arts. He says it's the cleanness of the punches, how many times yet. There are still 8 counts in amateur boxing. I mean, come on, it's really sad. I always say, I hope they find a good gym. Like New York, go to Renzo Gracie's academy. Go start training there. And once you start understanding the submissions and you see the people that are involved in mixed martial arts, I think he's going to get a respect for mixed martial arts.
One thing I'll throw out to you guys, the experts here, to ask, was it sort of maybe still in the back of Bob Reilly and others who oppose this in their mind, maybe some of the early times of the way it was presented, Dana can be a very flamboyant and controversial character. Mm-hmm. And congratulations to him, too. This is a huge honor to be invited to speak at Oxford University. Mm-hmm. So obviously that shows respect. But there was a time of the posturing from a lot of MMA that maybe that set people off, where you go in and you're the business guy and you sit down and say, look, here's what we bring, as opposed to, we're all tough and everybody's tough.
I think it goes back. I think it goes back further than Zuffa and Dana, and certainly Dana as a representative of a $100 million company, sometimes dropping F-bombs and doing some of the things he does. Maybe isn't a great, accurate representation or what we expect from a businessman. But I think it goes back further than that. I think the kind of the freak show of the early UFCs and the way it was marketing back then, and putting guys like Tank Abbott out front, who was all about drinking beer and coming off the bar stool and going out in the cage, created an image that we're still in some ways, in some minds, trying to overcome.
Yeah, the word human cockfighting from McCain, it's also still repeated by those politicians. That's a comment made 12 years ago, if not longer. Mm-hmm. You see, they just look at the history. It's exactly what you're saying. It's a cage also, it doesn't help. The whole thing, what happened in the beginning, that theatrical stuff, that was just bad, no rules. But we changed, and we made a lot of rules now, so...
Well, again, even though he opposed, we appreciate Bob Reilly's time. We'll point out that obviously he's not the only guy stopping it in New York State, else it would be in effect. You know, he just seems to be the most vocal. Next week we'll find out a little more about the economic implications, because I think that's going to be the bottom line. They saw how big that show was in Boston. They're seeing how big it's getting in other places, and money's coming in, and somebody in New York with influence in the city is going to say, we got to get the show here. We got Madison Square Garden. You know how many people? We'd have 20,000. The expo they could have up there, there's a lot of money to be made.
There's a lot of money to be made. But if he talks the same to his other politicians and he says the same line, he puts it in gambling, prostitution, MMA, those guys right away believe him. They don't do their homework. They just believe what he says and say, of course, I'm opposed to it.
Yeah.
That's how it goes right now. It really goes like that.
Well, there's a lot of that in this country right now, isn't there? You make blanket statements and you kind of lump everybody together and it makes it easier, doesn't it?
They just repeat what other people say. That's the worst. Nobody does their homework. Ooh, can't stand that.
You know what this means?
No.
I guess we got to bring a bunch of gamblers and prostitutes on the show now.
That will help our image.
I tell you what, I bet that would get us a lot more guests. I bet they'd readily line up some of them that's been hesitant.
Or do a live execution.
Some would say that happens in a metaphorical way every week.